Awesome.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're here today with Dr. Todd Green, an Associate Professor of Marketing in the Goodman School of Business here at Brock. Todd holds a PhD in Marketing from Simon Fraser U, an MBA from McMaster University, and a BSc in Finance from Seton Hall University. Here at Brock, he teaches courses in marketing, marketing communications, and consumer behavior. And we've read now 2 papers that Todd provided for the class, which was very interesting. And so I'm going to pass the floor to you so that you can provide us with an overview of CSR, what it is, and when it works.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I understand it's the last one. You probably shouldn't have saved me for last, but that's okay. Should have started low with me and then ended on a high, but that's okay. So thanks so much again for having me. As noted, I teach in the business school here. I'm pretty sure I was the only business professor at one point that was part of the ESRC, and now we have 3, so it's sort of expanding a little bit. I also know that there's a whole wide variety of backgrounds. So how many of you have never taken a marketing class, ever? And how many of you are like, marketing, really? How does that relate to social responsibility and ethics? And I get that a lot when I say, I did my PhD in marketing, and they're like, cool. Many people don't believe that there is such a thing, which is kind of interesting. And I explain, no, I look at when companies do good stuff, right? So we all have experience with companies trying to say they're doing good things. And there's often times where we don't really necessarily believe them either, right? So there's sort of like this healthy dose of skepticism, right? So companies are expected to do stuff. There's a lot of surveys that are saying, address climate change, donate to causes, change the way that you treat your employees, and so on. And then they talk about it, and then people say, no, not that way, or no, we don't believe you, or you are in this industry, you can't possibly be socially responsible, or you're a huge multinational corporation, so we don't really believe you either. And so I'll talk to you about when it works. I'll talk to you about my own personal experience as well, when it doesn't work, and that kind of stuff. So I will start with not like the most uplifting stories. So as Marilyn mentioned, it's called Seton Hall, but I wasn't going to, it doesn't matter. Seton. It's in New Jersey. No worries. So yeah, I didn't really want to be like, actually, man, no, but so I played tennis at Seton Hall more than I went to class, which was kind of a fun undergrad in retrospect, but maybe not the best academic ones, I suppose. But in my 4th year, there was a fire in the freshman dorm. 3 young boys, 18 years old, passed away. About 70 kids were badly injured. We had news helicopters flying over our campus for several days. You could hear the alarms going off in the dorms that hadn't been turned off from that day. It was just a horrible experience. So I don't mean to like start with huge doom and gloom, but it does relate to my experience with CSR. A friend of mine, we designed t-shirts. I'm far from a graphic designer, but we just came up with an interesting slogan, and we sold about $20,000 worth of t-shirts. We thought we were doing a good thing. We were selling them at the basketball games. There was tons of interest. We had to get more and more t-shirts, and so we thought, this is good. The school newspaper put out a story that said that the tennis team and the soccer team that my friend was on, we were raising money for our spring break trip for these t-shirts, and then people stopped buying the t-shirts. And we weren't invited to say, well, no, that's actually not what's happening. So once the motive behind something I thought was good was perceived as not good, it backfired. And so I'm cheating a little bit because I told this story as part of my PhD proposal, but I feel confident in knowing that none of you were in that room back in 2012 in Vancouver. So I tell that story as a little bit of context because companies often think if we do something good, people are going to like us. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all for doing good things. We were not invited to talk about that. It was not for our spring break trip. The tennis team was an afterthought on that campus, but we didn't have spring break trips to begin with. So it was just really, really hard, and it's frustrating. Flash forward a little bit, I worked in commercial insurance and risk management type stuff, and I used to do as the United Way team captain for the whole job. They have the same thing here at Brock. We used to do like the CN Tower stair climb. We used to do other things. I would not be able to do the stair climb now, but I could when I was in my 20s. And so I would go around and ask people if they wanted to donate directly from their payroll. And some people would say really nasty, awful things about the United Way and why are we supporting them, and they spend all their money on marketing. See, marketing, evil, right? And so people just said they don't support the causes, they don't actually follow through on what they say they do, and so on. And so I, again, was thinking naively, well, we're doing something good as a company. If you throw $10 a month in your payroll towards this organization, people will like it and they'll be happy. And that was not the case. I started a charitable children's choir for kids between 8 and 18. We're in 6 cities across Canada now, and I have to rely on corporate donors. So I use some of my experience with CSR research to say, who's a fit with us? Who currently in their portfolio of causes would look at us and say, yeah, like I want to work with kids, or I like arts, or we wouldn't exist without TD. And there's probably people in the room who had that experience with TD, or like they charge me $4 when I take my money out of an RBC machine. Therefore, like I hate all the big banks and so on, or they make billions of dollars each quarter. They're not really that socially responsible in the end, right? But I can tell you from my experience, we would not exist without some of our corporate donors, right? This is it's hidden. That's not the only reason I'm asked, but it's a good. It's like the 8th time I've done Movember. I think I'm the only person on the business school team, which is kind of sad. Like I think I have to add my 8-year-old son to the team just so we have 2 people. In the past, we have had like 10, 15 people in solidarity with ugly looking, scary mustaches and so on. So I've done it a whole bunch of different times. Probably cumulatively, we've raised like $20,000 as a team and stuff like that. So how many of you would say you have experience with CSR or corporate social responsibility? Okay, I think all of you do. So good. I'm glad only a few of you, because every single one of you at some point as a consumer has been asked, would you like to round up your purchase? Has anyone ever been to McDonald's at some point and been like, I should put some money in the Ronald McDonald House, right? Or been at the LCBO and they say, after offering you free samples, would you like to donate to MAD? It's like, kind of weird, right? It's not really socially responsible or ethical, but okay, moving on. We'll donate to MAD, right? Every single one of you has seen an ad where a company has tried to say, we are taking a stance on this issue. Every single one of you has seen the Pride Month avatars are rainbow for a month. And then you question, does the brand actually care? Or they do an Earth Day ad, or you have oil companies that say, we are investing in wind, and you're like, I don't necessarily believe you that you want to invest in wind, and so on. So yeah, you all have experience, and so it actually makes my life a little bit easier if I give you that context. If you all are consumers, you all actually go somewhere that is the biggest United Way contributor in the entire Niagara region, like over $100,000 every year for the United Way campaign. Right? So now you're just as experienced and know just as much as I do, maybe more potentially too. All right. So as noted, there is this expectation to do more, and as I said, we also often don't believe them, right? Or if a huge multinational makes a $2,000 donation, how many of you would think, okay, Microsoft Canada, $2,000? Like I personally could probably scrounge together $2,000 if I had to in a month. You're like, you're monstrous. What gives, right? So the characteristics of the cause, the company who's supporting it, the characteristics of us as consumers, these can all influence whether or not it works. And so we have these sort of like conflicting things, like do more, but don't tell me. And in some parts of the world, explicit CSR communications, people think it's just sort of grandstanding or window dressing and they're not actually doing anything. So they want to rely on internal stakeholders. So how many of you have worked somewhere that you were proud to say you worked there and you felt like they gave back or they did the right thing in the community? So if you're willing to say that, like think of sort of the dinner party setting. I don't know how many dinner parties you have as students. I didn't have a lot. I still do, because I think the PhD made me less social and less personable. I don't know. Like, oftentimes, you don't want to say, oh, this is what I do for a living, right? And I remember, even when I worked in commercial insurance, people were like, insurance, right? And we did a lot in the community, but people were still like, yeah, but you overcharge for my house insurance, so I hate you anyways, right? And so you have these, as I said, you know, sort of these expectations. How should you frame it? Should you make it about saving the planet or helping you save money as a consumer? Should we say the world is going to hell unless we start making changes, or this is how good the world can be if we make changes? So there's tons of different ways you can communicate, and brands often don't communicate that well. So if you have time, check out, there's a really bad CSR ad from BP following the huge oil spill, where they're like, we're doing great things in the Gulf. And it was like, but you did really bad things in the Gulf first, and that's why you're doing these supposed good things. And so when you change your name from British Petroleum to Beyond Petroleum, people don't really necessarily believe that they're beyond petroleum. They're like, no, you're still the bad company. And they had a woman who was from the Gulf Coast to talk about it, to say, I'm proud to work here, and I'm so happy for all the good work we've done in the coast, and you can now eat shrimp here. And I was like, yes, you could eat shrimp before you were there, and did a horrible job to the whole region and killed tourism in many cases. All right? Okay, so yeah, I feel like I'm speaking very negatively about the area, but I feel like as I've done this more and more, I get really sort of like hypercritical when I'm watching these ads. Ads in general, I think it probably drives my wife crazy, because as we're watching ads, I'm like, oh, that's really bad ad, or that's really bad. Like, they're terrible. What's their messaging? What are they trying to get us to do? And she's like, maybe getting you to stop talking would be awesome. But yeah, so anyways, I think for me, it's, even if you're not in marketing, you're exposed. How many ads do you think you see in a day, or brand messages, I should say?
Hundreds.
What's like a number guess someone's willing to commit to, keeping in mind that you're live streaming to the entire globe right now? And if you get it wrong, it's forever etched. Does anyone want to guess?
50.
50, keep going. Well, 3,500.
Oh.
Yeah, so every single one of you has a brand, right? Like every single one of you in the room has about 15 to 20 branded items probably on you. By the way, like shoes and so on, socks, blah, 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 mask, whatever. Laptops, like when I'm teaching, I can see, okay, we have a lot of like MacBook fans in the room, or we have like the weirdo like myself who has an HP and stuff like that. And they're like, they're so old, right? So we see 3,500 brand messages a day. On average, we remember about 70. So the challenge for marketers is to cut through all that clutter and be effective and be believable and build trust. And a lot of us have our defenses up when it's an identified brand message as well. Okay, so yeah, so not exactly 50 or 150, a little more, right? And so you have to be effective with your messaging, and you have to be memorable as well. Okay, so what happened was there was some early research. I am not growing up or like wishing I grew up in the 40s so that I could do research in the 70s and 80s. Not saying this, but the research in the best journals in marketing and management in the world at that point was like straight line, do some CSR to people like you. That was it. There was no nuance to it whatsoever. It was just sort of like, oh, you donated? Cool, you had a big check. You held some puppies as a CEO. Yay, like everyone loves you. And that was the research. And that was in like Journal of Marketing, Journal of Management, and so on. There's not ever looking for moderators. There's no discussion of mediators. And it started just, it had to get a little bit more nuanced. And now to say, this is when it works. And then there's also times when we can use social norms and things like that to actually make you make the wrong decision, which is kind of interesting. Like there's some studies where they've said, we can manipulate you to not reuse your towel at a hotel by using social norms in a different way. So study 1, 2, and 3, you reuse the towel. Study 4, we flip the framing, and now you don't reuse it. And obviously we don't want people to make bad decisions, but we can also manipulate people pretty easily. Like I have a study where all I did was, I said, yeah, this company is good, for lack of a better word. This company is not so good and has been accused of some bad labor practices. And then it was like, by the way, here's some chocolate made by that company. That bad company tasted like 4 points lower on a scale of 10. It was the exact same chocolate. So all I had to do was just tell people this company's bad. And people were like, oh, this chocolate tastes good to me all the time. So I was very confused by this finding. And but it was mediated by guilt. And so people felt guilty consuming something made by a bad company, for example. And so things like self-presentation, how many of you have brands that you shop at, but you're like, debatable, should I really be doing this? Like, do I feel good about it? And so some people might not ask for a reusable bag from Walmart, for example, but you might be like, ooh, IKEA does really good things with sustainability, so I'll advertise that I like IKEA and so on, right? And people will buy gifts for other people when it's CSR related too, okay? Yeah, so we don't have the time, but this CSR research does also look at not only individual investors, but institutional as well, or employees, like how committed you are to that organization or how likely you are to apply for a job based on CSR practices of that company and so on. So there's a lot out there. All right, this is actually I disagree with, but I included it. So, because I think it's good to disagree with stuff. I don't know, I tell that to my students, like disagree with me, disagree with the text. That's the only way you're really gonna, like, I think, grow and not just be like, I'll remember this for a test and not really understand it. So I do encourage, you can boo me if you have, like, whatever. So for me, I don't think you're socially responsible if you are profitable. I don't think that makes you socially responsible solely in employing people and the CEO making 82 times the lowest paid employee. That, to me, is not a pillar of social responsibility. Following the law, if you stop at a stop sign on campus or you don't speed and you don't run over and hit people, nobody's going to say, oh, you're a very socially responsible, ethical person. Like, here's your badge for being nice and not breaking the law. So again, I don't think following the law and like not polluting and so on, or not mistreating your employees makes you a socially responsible company. It's not really like, you can't really say, should you break the law, right? So to me, I feel like it starts here. So are you ethical or are you philanthropic? Yeah, so meeting the bare minimum legal requirements feels like a bit of an empty thing to say, like, yeah, we don't break laws as far as we know. And when you think of like ethical marketers or managers, how many of you would think someone's ethical if they just said, we just do whatever the lawyers tell us, right? And the other thing is too, the legal landscape versus the ethical landscape changes really, really quickly. You could say whatever you wanted basically when blogs first came out and slander people, and there was no legal avenue whatsoever. So keep in mind the legal versus ethical playgrounds in a way sort of changed. And what might, like the company I worked at in commercial insurance got brought down by a lawsuit based on something that was unethical that eventually became illegal. So we were sued for $6 billion by the Attorney General of New York. 10,000 people lost their jobs. Friends of mine were like carted out with boxes for their belongings by a career counselor. And then the CEO got a $28 million thank you walk away gift. We were like, wait a minute, that's not really fair, right? So I do want you to realize, I think anyways, that ethical is where it starts. Okay. Yeah, so that person's very well known and well respected. Probably doesn't like me, but that's okay. Anyway, so I picked some of the most common definitions. I'll explain why I don't really absolutely love this one. I feel like a commitment to minimize. So how many of you know plant-based water bottles or Pepsi bottles? And it says, why do I know this? Because I do CSR. So I know it says up to 27% plant material. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, 0 is up to 27% too, or like 0.1% is up to 27%. Or when you say like, oh, we're doing our best to try and eliminate waste and stuff like that. Or there's a Starbucks on Thorold Stone, and I was waiting for my coffee and it said, wherever possible, we used recyclable materials. And you could very easily say, well, it just was not possible. Like we tried and we made a point of putting it on our walls that wherever possible. So what is like this one piece of wood is recycled or recovered, and then the rest is not. So this is very, very commonly accepted and quoted, and I think that I have probably several thousand citations that includes this definition. This one's a little bit more narrow and a little bit easier for me because I look at it as like specific CSR activities that you as a company decide to invest in. And so I frame it as like, what are the CSR activities that they're investing in, and what are they prioritizing with their money to invest in as well? And then you can decide like, okay, well, is it minimizing or is it eliminating? I think that's a little bit too sort of like wishy-washy. And then it's like, okay, but what are the long run beneficial impact on society? Like, how many of you think most companies would think the long run beneficial impact is to make a lot more of money, right? And so the impacts or the positive effects might vary. Like if I teach MBA students, how many of you think MBA students have like big hearts and they're like, oh, we should also focus on social justice alongside profits, right? Or, you know, like the global economic crisis was pretty much caused by like finance bros and right. So the MBA program doesn't have the most sort of soft image or the most caring thing globally, right? And I mean, I'm fine. I'm willing to admit that probably many of you thought, oh, a marketing professor, cool. Okay, so he's going to try and make us buy stuff at the end of the class or whatever, right? And so that's sort of the sense within business schools is that they say ethics and social responsibility and sustainability are going to be included in the curriculum. What often happens is it's like the last chapter in every textbook. And it's just sort of an add-on. Say, oh yeah, okay, here's some ethics stuff that we're going to talk about, or you should make some green products and people will like you. And so it does feel like a little bit of an add-on, okay? All right. So arguments for it. Porter and Kramer, how many of you have ever heard of Porter's 5 forces? It's like this management model. Yeah, so probably only a few of you, but that's okay. You don't need intimate knowledge of Porter. The idea is that if you go to Home Depot and all of the customers that go to Home Depot at some point during the year donate to Habitat for Humanity, that makes a way more bigger collective impact than if I try and donate to Habitat for Humanity on my own, for example. So you're bringing a collective of people together. Yeah, this idea of a halo effect, I would say arguably that Toyota had it for a while with the Prius. How many of you are willing to sort of admit that because the Prius was a hybrid and it was made by Toyota, we're like, well, Toyota's probably nice. Like, they're probably good people. They have a hybrid, right? And then they had issues with their brakes. And then people were like, how much protection does the Prius provide us? But this idea of a reservoir of goodwill, how many of you would be more willing to forgive a company that you think is socially responsible if like a small corporate scandal comes out as opposed to like Walmart or other companies that we don't necessarily like? We sort of make the assumption like, oh, well, they're bad anyway, so okay, moving on, right? Okay, so more arguments. This idea of a form of insurance. I think it's a little bit difficult to quantify, but you don't really want to ignore the potential effects that CSR sort of acts as this layer of insurance and protection for you. The other thing is noted rising consumer expectations, and then you're gonna have to listen to me talk about a bunch of different positive consumer outcomes in a little bit as well. All right, I used to have like 4 slides for arguments against and 2 slides for arguments for, and then I'm like, wait a minute, am I arguing against my own job? So I've now made it 2 and 2 to be balanced. That's actually what I had before. Anyway, so yes, that's a terrible dad joke, Apple at core, but anyways, it's what I do. I guess it's not really a joke if you have to point it out after the fact, whatever, right? So the idea is these tech companies or these oil companies, they're not social agencies, they are not charities, they are not meant, like that's not what they do best. And so they aren't really, they shouldn't even try because that's not what they are in business to do. Okay, so that's one argument against it. And I should clarify, I don't agree with these arguments against it. It's just what's out there in the literature to say, this isn't gonna work, it's not of any value. This one goes back way back to the 60s. There is a huge assumption in here that if companies invest in CSR at some cost versus it's going to lead to positive returns. And so that's sort of like the big, I think, hole in the argument is it's basically saying, yeah, it's just going to cost you money and it's not going to lead to positive returns, and you're taking away money from your shareholders and your employees if they have profit sharing and stuff like that. I sort of do agree with this one though. Like if the CEO says, I love United Way, I don't care what any of you want to do, I don't care if it's not a fit with what our company does, we are going to do the United Way, then I feel like that could be problematic in terms of leadership preferences, right? Okay. Yeah, the other thing is, I took finance in my undergrad a really, really long time ago, but I remember always like the quarterly expectations. Like you have to meet the quarterly expectations, and if you don't, your stock goes down and people are miserable and you get downgraded, and people on TV are talking about how badly Disney did because one of their movies failed or and so on, right? And so if you are always looking at short-term consequences and sort of meeting the expectations of the streets for your profits and sales and so on, you might not look at CSR as sort of like the short-term solution. Or you might even cut it. Like that actually happens during recessions. A lot of companies cut spending on marketing. The brands that continue to spend during the recession actually turn out way better. So if you cut CSR and you're known as a CSR brand, or you cut your commitment short and you say, we're going to do a 15-year agreement with the cancer run, and then you stop it after 3 years and say, oh, sorry, like we had a bad year, what are you going to do? It's way worse to not look like you're committed, okay? The other thing is CSR going to lead you to positive results, or do you have to have positive results first before you can start investing in it in CSR? So the causality between the two is sort of been up for debate as well. All right. Yeah, what I usually demonstrate this with is my intro class. I'm like, okay, raise your hands if you care about companies that do good things. And every single one of them puts up their hands, and then I say, okay, keep your hand up if you've made a purchase in the last month based on the ethical stance or social issue that a brand supported, and then every single person puts their hand down, except for maybe one. Usually it's 0. And so this attitude behavior gap, sometimes there's a lack of information in the marketplace. We don't maybe have the time. Like you're all students. How many of you would say time management is like the most difficult part of being a student? I know when I was doing my PhD, that was definitely, and I'm not nearly as organized as my wife is. She's doing her PhD with a child and a dog and another child and me. Anyway, so time management, like most of us aren't like, let me look into the social rankings of this, or let me see how long this product will take to dispose, or I'd like to know more about their operations, or tell me more about these ingredients, company X, right? And so oftentimes we just sort of rely on what's called heuristics, which is like mental shortcuts to say, okay, well, I always buy Tide, so I'm going to assume that they're good and it's fine, right? Wrong approach by advertisers, so depending on how they frame it. There's also something called the construal level. Has anyone heard of that? So it's like concrete versus abstract. So do you make it, if you use cold water detergent, you will save $1,200 a year on, I'm making that number up, so that's totally wrong, I'm sure, but, or do you just say, you will save money by using cold water detergent, right? So there's different ways of framing it. Do you make it specific and concrete or a little bit abstract? Probably every single one of you, for your own research, I imagine, have seen concrete versus abstract framing when it comes to trying to make a difference or make people act, and that could be like legislators as well, or other researchers, policymakers, and so on, okay? This is kind of bad and sad, but there is some research that said there's a sustainability liability. And so the idea is, yeah, I don't think that green cleaning product's going to clean that well. So how many of you have that belief sometimes? Like, I remember one of my interviewers said, oh, is it like ethical coffee tastes like dirt, but I still drink it, so I feel good about myself to other people. And I was like, oh, okay, if you say so, right? And so this idea that ethical products are lower quality, what also used to happen is people would use 3 times as much green laundry detergent as they did the standard detergent. So then there'd be more waste and packaging being thrown out because people were like dumping the green detergent in by like the barrel full, right? There's also suggestions that it's just like, if you are a new brand, you don't focus on, you don't focus on ethicality, you focus on the quality first. And then once you're established as sort of like a quality product, then you can say, oh, by the way, we're also good. So there is some things that it was like tastes great or more fulfilling. So it was a play on an old beer ad that probably like 5 of us would remember in the room, and the rest of you are forgiven for not remembering it. But it was like tastes great, less filling. So that was the play on words for that. So, okay. All right. So is it clear what it means, right? So I just picked Coke. How many of you have brand associations of Coke as being like ocean friendly or like the green brand of sodas or Coke, you know, right? And so will they get any benefit from having a whale tail sticking out and the WWF panda on there? I do know that they have all electric fleets in terms of like their distribution and stuff like that. But in saying that, I was at a sustainability conference in Portland in my PhD, and the guy from Frito-Lay North America was there and said, oh, like we're a zero waste facility and we have, like we use renewable energy from the roof. We have solar panels on our parking garage and people commute together. And then this woman's like, cool, but you make sugar drinks and shitty snacks for kids, so who cares? And it just was like, that's super quiet, right? I doubt the Pepsi Frito-Lay guy was like, I hate the city of Portland now. Like it was interesting. So are they going to get any benefit from it? But then Patagonia, would most of you say has a better reputation overall than Coke? Probably, right? But they're saying don't buy this jacket. So is anti-consumption a form of CSR? To say, no, you should reuse or reduce. Some of us grew up with reduce, reuse, recycle. The 3 R's was like this big deal in school and words to live by and so on. So by saying, well, like I say, I had to reimagine, so there's extra R's in their vocabulary as well, right? But this idea of repairing and so on, is that a form of CSR? And that's obviously, it's going to be really idiosyncratic, and all of us will say, maybe, yeah, no, I don't think so. Like, is free Wi-Fi at Starbucks considered CSR? I don't think so. I think they have to, like, make a donation or make a change to their operations, right? But that's one of the things that sort of plagues the CSR research is the lack of a common agreed upon definition. And every year there's a new paper that tries to make a new, sometimes they shift it to corporate responsiveness or corporate responsibility, or they take out social, or they try and take out the word corporate because corporate sort of means like evil demons feeling, right? So it's interesting, new framing, new definitions all the time. So that makes it a bit of a moving target too. Okay. So Pelosi and Shang is my friend for my PhD, and Pelosi was my supervisor. So this was the paper that I included. Partially I included it because it just gives a nice systematic review of the literature to say, but also to make it clear that there is a lot of stuff that's been said about how consumers respond to CSR as well. If I remember correctly in the review process, they just had products, and then academics and business like 2 by 2. So they said, well, it seems like some of this is about helping you derive value from the CSR, and some of it is about deriving benefits in society. So we want you to add this other oriented. And they're like, well, that's one of the best marketing journals, so okay, we'll listen to you. But they didn't really want to, so it has sort of been collapsed to just products. Because these are the exact same products, it's just framed differently in terms of the value source, okay? All right, so this was based on about 190 articles, I think, that they included in the review, if I remember correctly. But there are others, right? So it sort of complicates things. And we hear about like diversity and inclusivity and things like that quite a lot. And I know our MBA program was the most diverse and inclusive MBA program in Canada. And so then we had to do a talk on diversity and inclusivity for a panel discussion to sort of be like, yay, MBA program and stuff like that, right? So there's a whole bunch of things, as noted here, that companies can do, and they have to make sense of which ones they should do, and which ones to invest in, and then which ones to talk about as well, okay? All right, so, as mentioned, there are, based on the literature, and I didn't include citations for each one of these, it's spread across those 190 plus articles, but there are a whole bunch of positive consumer outcomes. The one sort of monstrous asterisk I would add to this is, all of these are attitudinal measures for the most part, right? And so it's like, how likely are you to buy from this nice brand that's going to open up this chocolate store? And people say, I'm very likely to. And then they taste it and they're like, oh wait, no, I'm not going to. Or, right, so if you have behavioral measures, and I try to include them as much as possible in my own research, it gets past the attitude behavior gap that I mentioned. There's a lot of weird approach to the attitude behavior gap in the CSR research where they think, if I simply acknowledge it somewhere in the lit review that the attitude behavior gap is problematic, and I'll be like, I'm aware of it, I'm just not going to do anything about it, and here's purchase intentions as my measures, you'll get away with it. And it's not as common now. You have to have like typically one behavioral study as well, okay? So yeah, there are a whole bunch of reasons for why brand managers say, yeah, we should invest in CSR. All right, okay. So there are some factors as well. So some of the characteristics, so I'm not going to show this, but as I said, I have a 14-day-old mustache. Movember is sponsored by Gillette, and it's sponsored by Harley-Davidson, and randomly Pringles, and then I realized not so random because the Pringles logo, the guy has a huge mustache. And so later this month, every time you get a $50 donation to your Movember campaign, Pringles is going to add $25. And at first I thought, chips, other than like chips breaking off and getting stuck in our mustaches, I don't see a fit. Like it does not. And then I saw the logo and I thought, okay. But most of us would also say that CIBC and Run for the Cure doesn't really make entirely good sense, but you can actually kind of manufacture it, quote unquote, by being committed to it over a long time. And now I would say a big part of the CIBC brand story is the annual Run for the Cure, right? But on the surface, most of us would not say, right, banking and breast cancer, totally, yeah, that makes sense, right? It's more like, okay, dog food manufacturers supporting the SPCA or having adopt-a-thons at local dog stores and stuff like that. I'm way more into that now because I have a dog, but yeah. And then sometimes there's absolutely no fit. So there was a German beer company during a World Cup, I think like probably 10 years ago, that for every case of beer you bought, they would donate to save an acre of land in the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. And it was like, okay, wait a minute. And then Kentucky Fried Chicken had the buckets for the cure, and they rebranded their buckets and made them pink, and people thought, fried chicken, no connection whatsoever to breast cancer. And so there are times where the fit, most of the research suggests, and I did a review, it's a failed review, just so to let you know that people fail, and it's like, I'm still here. They didn't let me go. I might have launched something small across my office when it got rejected in the 4th round, but whatever, I'm fine, right? Here, it's cool. Anyway, so this idea of fit, there's about 35 articles that looked at fit, and around 29, 30 of them said, yeah, more fit is better. So that's sort of one of the general findings. The idea of being committed, commitment can include both over long term and then also dollars. So that goes back to when I said, oh, Microsoft, $2,000, that's a bit strange. So if you are a large company, you typically want to speak to your ongoing commitment versus like, how many of you like the Coke ads with the polar bears? And you think, well, even though polar bears would massacre you the second they had a chance, they're like really cute in those Coke ads, right? So in the small print, it says up to $100,000. And since I started talking, we know that Coke has made way more than $100,000 across Canada, easily, right? So having that little asterisk in the small print, it's like, wait a minute. Anyways, so the commitment has to be there. Obviously, if a corner store gives $100 to a local cause, most of us aren't like, how dare you, right? You're like, wow, that's so nice of you, right? They really care. Hedonic versus utilitarian. So the idea is if one of the studies looked at if you go to the school store and you buy chocolate, the chocolate is much better paired with a charity than if you buy a pen or paper. So if you're buying something that's utilitarian, it doesn't really necessarily, like, people don't feel like less guilty because you don't have guilt about buying a pen. But if you buy chocolate or ice cream or some of the like hedonic or luxury items that you don't really necessarily need, like sometimes they're called frivolous, sometimes they're called hedonic, sometimes they're called luxury brands. The idea is the brand association with luxury, and the brand association it's much more like self-enhancement, and CSR is supposed to be more like self-transcendent. So you don't really see like Lamborghinis, we now donate $1,000 to the local charitable hospital, for example, or like Prada for sick kids, or you know what I mean, right? We don't typically see that. But hedonic products actually perform better in the research because it gets rid of some of our guilt. Characteristics of the ad, so you could have a solely dedicated ad to CSR, or you could have one that's more, it's reliable, it's durable, it's quality for price and things like that. Or you could have a mixed one as well. And so when I did this review of 4,200 print ads and then compared it to the 190 articles, there's some misalignment between what was found in the literature and what people were doing. Yeah, there's no real huge surprise that women care more. That's most of the findings, is that when there is a gender effect in the research, it leans in the direction of women caring more for green products or CSR products, or willingness to pay more compared to men. But there has been some research that you show if it's like goal-oriented and self-benefit, that it will work better for male consumers as well. So framing, right? Okay. So there's a whole bunch of other things. Has anyone heard of the level of involvement? I don't know what that means. So it's like how important this product decision is. And so it's at the product category level. So if it's like a high level of involvement, typically if it's paired with a cause, it works better. You've all seen ads at some point about like conservation, like use less water, or you can make a difference by voting, right? Like that's sort of the principle behind, if any of you remember, like MTV's Rock the Vote, was trying to get young people to say, vote, and then Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam would be like, yeah, vote. And then young people would be like, yeah, I'm gonna vote, right? And the idea was, you can make a difference if you vote. You can make a difference through this purchase. And so it is commonly used as a mediator. There are people who, like, it sounds weird to say this, and most people don't like to say this, but when I say, are there causes you don't like, or are there charities you don't like? Most of us think, I'm not going to say that in front of other people. But fortunately, people I interviewed felt way more comfortable than all of you did. And they were like, I hate UNICEF. And I was like, oh, okay, that's surprising. Okay, so go on, carry on. And so you might pick a cause that some people don't like, right? Even the woman we're working with, United Way Niagara, from my other class, and she's admitted, like, some of people don't understand what we do. They think we spend too much on marketing. So there's probably Brock students and staff who are like, why United Way? I don't get it, right? And so some people, if you don't have a positive affinity towards the cause, will not support it, okay? This is interesting. Maybe it's not a huge surprise that sometimes consumers are, that's a nice way of saying dumb, I don't know, but so we'll say they didn't understand the difference between if you were doing a flat amount of a donation or a percentage of sales or a percentage of profits, of which one was more. It's super simple math. And so I have a small company and we used to donate 15% of our revenue, and someone's like, why don't you donate your 15% of your profits? And I'm like, so let me take you through an income statement, my friend. Like, the sales is bigger than your profit, so it's bigger. And people didn't understand it and got outraged the way that people frame their donation, which is kind of nuts, right? Sometimes we feel like an ongoing cause is an impossible cause to tackle. So you've heard of things like wicked problems and so on. And so if it's disaster relief, there's an earthquake, or there's a humanitarian crisis, you might feel like, okay, I can make a difference in the short term and try and help out now, for example. And I mentioned about the size of the company. I don't know why that one has a period, but whatever. It's the last bullet, so I guess it works. Anyway, so yeah, my failed review, as I said, it's fine. I put in or something like that, right? So what's happened is I read 190 articles. I coded the response. I looked for patterns of best practices for what researchers say companies should do to be effective. The other thing it helped me is that there was alignment and misalignment. And so it was actually way more utilitarian brands that use CSR and very few hedonic brands work in practice. And so how many of you would agree that there's typically like a research practice gap? I mean, we don't have to explain why, or like, why do you think this happens? I'm like, well, when I worked in commercial insurance, I wasn't thinking like, what would the behavioral scientists say about this sales process I'm going through right now? Like, how should I deal with the underwriter according to Kahneman and Tversky? You know, like, that could happen. And when I sent articles to my friends who worked in insurance that were about insurance, they're like, cool, like, they're not gonna read it, right? So there is this practice and research divide, and it's pretty evident across some of the variables. So one of the things we did is we looked at the percentage of female readers from the media kit, and then we looked at the percentage of CSR ads. The ads that had, or sorry, the magazines that had skewed towards female readership did have more CSR ads in them, so that was good. Like, it showed that there was an understanding. But probably the big picture, if I went out and talked to advertisers and say, how do you make decisions about CSR? I'd say it's sort of like, well, we've always done it that way. So there's maybe like tradition. I don't think they're going to be staying current with what the academic research is saying on gender effects or commitments. Across 4,200 print ads, the one brand that came up the most was Chevrolet, and that was across, or GM, and that was across all of like their sub-brands, and there was only 21 ads in over 4,000, and that was over a 4-year constructed sample. So if you think of most brands were like one-offs, I think there's like 200 and something brands that had one ad over that full 4-year sample. That looks like a lack of commitment from the outside. Like, yes, they do social media probably, or they have radio, so there's other outlets and they have their websites, but from like, it's still reaching hundreds of millions of readers a year with these magazines, right? So a little bit of a missed opportunity. And then there was clear fit for the most part between most of the companies and the companies. All right. Yeah, so we thought, okay, cool, we're doing a 2-step process, we're comparing them across, we're looking for alignment. The research practice gap is talked about quite a lot, and then got rejected in the 4th round because someone said cause-related marketing is not CSR, and then we're like, it's actually the most commonly studied form of CSR in the CSR literature, and then the editor just went with what the reviewer said, so maybe they were like pals or something. But anyways, it was kind of weird. Probably should have turned it into a white paper, but by then the data was just kind of old, and to go and update the literature and now look at another 4,200 print ads, I would say, okay, lesson learned, move on. We'll go on to some other stuff. Forget about it until today, right? Dredged up. Only, right? Anyways, so one of the things that was also interesting too is I quoted the type of CSR activity in the ad and then compared it to the type of CSR ads included in the review, and it was polar opposite. So most ads are focused on business practices and product-related CSR, and most CSR research is focused on philanthropy. And so really, as noted here, when people say CSR leads to all these positive consumer outcomes, like I did a couple of slides ago, does that mean, is it really CSR, or is it mostly corporate philanthropy works? And so that's one thing. And we thought we were making a good contribution with that. They disagreed, so what are you going to do, right? But what happens is now I'm able, when I'm doing my lit review for papers, it's super easy because I've read over 200 and something papers on the consumer response to CSR. So if I'm building something on commitments, I'm like, okay, shall we go back to the well of the failed review paper, cut and paste, because it's never gone anywhere. So it's made my life a little bit easier. I have this nice table that summarizes 190 articles of the findings and all that stuff. So just some copy paste and voila, right? So it's not terrible in the grand scheme, it's fine. So how many of you know Alexandra, who's in the program? So I had the cool opportunity to work with her, still getting to work with her. So we got a grant.
Todd, can I just put that in context? For everybody who's in 5P01, the Foundations of Sustainability class, Alexandra is the one who works for the region that we met at the fire pit.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, and she's cool. She probably already knows. Super easy to work with. Kept me in line. It was good, and on time and all that stuff. Like, we're supposed to meet 10 minutes ago. No. So her MRP, what we did is we put a survey together. We went out to marketers and we asked them, okay, we had a proposive sample, so I should explain that too. We only wanted marketers who had experience with CSR / like social issue, environmental issue campaigns, and then asked them a whole bunch of questions about their experience with it. And it was also framed in the idea of like, how much of an impact does greenwashing have on you as you are creating these ads Do you fear it? Do you care about it? How do you try to avoid it? Do you think it's changed your approach to marketing about social causes and so on? And so we got, well, I'll stop saying lucky because we worked hard on it. We got a grant from the CPA Center on campus, and it was for $5,000, and it's turning into a white paper that I don't know if it's ever going to get published because we keep asking them every few months, like, how's the white paper? Anyways, it's there, it's somewhere, it's been accepted, and then now we are doing the second round of data collection. We're hoping to get around like 50 to 75 people. We're going to pay them this time because we have $5,000 from the CPA. Yeah, so I think it was neat because Alexandra is not in the business school and she got a grant from the business school. And so to me, it speaks to sort of the value of working in different faculties and transdisciplinary. I won't mention that my work in the ESRC, they don't think it counts in the business school, but it doesn't matter. I got the grant, so who cares, right? But yeah, so it's been awesome getting to work with her, and so our data collection round 2 just started. And so yeah, these are all the potential things that you can have going through your mind right now. So I tried to be like broad, just like CSR. So yeah. Oops, I talked way too much. My bad.
No.